afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. I am Mike Schwartz, and I think most of you on the call today. It's nice to see some familiar names, and I'm sad I haven't seen many of you in quite some time, but hope everybody's doing well. We are going to talk today about iPlatform, which is made up of a couple of tools that we'll talk about. This is an amazing system to give you access to wonderful data about schools in New Hampshire. You are the first group for this season to be introduced to the updates to iPlatform, the department, for all of you at the department. So we look forward to your feedback from this presentation so we can modify it for as we start providing this type of training to schools and districts and other folks out there in the state. So we look forward to any feedback, and please give it to us during or after the call. A couple of housekeeping things. There is a Q&A option you should have in your Zoom session. Please submit questions there throughout the presentation. It's always better when it's dynamic and we've got questions going on throughout, so feel free to ask anytime. There's also a chat option, so if you want to share something with the full group, maybe there's something that you think everyone else should know about, please add it there as well. This iPlatform is a priority of the commissioner. The commissioner, as you all know, as you should all know, is dedicated to this concept of transparency and of helping all stakeholders in New Hampshire understand schools and how schools are performing, and collectively, hopefully, making the school system better. And one way to do that is by helping folks understand through looking at data. So the commissioner is very supportive and kind of a champion of this effort. The work, however, has been really led primarily by Dina Raybuck, who's on the call. And so Dina, doing most of the legwork to get this all together, has such a great knowledge of all the data in the department, as well as education policy in New Hampshire, has been able to kind of architect this. She's doing this as part of Caitlin Davis's bureau. So Caitlin and Nate Green from kind of a business side are sponsoring this work as well. So many thanks to Caitlin and to Nate for pulling together all the different components from data throughout the department into the iPlatform. So on the call today, or on this webinar, you've got Dina, as I just mentioned. And again, Dina's here to answer any questions. So if there's any question I can't answer, I know Dina can answer. Lauren Mercier is also on the call. Lauren and I are colleagues, and Lauren has been a teacher and educator for many years in New Hampshire. She's a school counselor for quite some time in all grades K to 12. Lauren is going to be helping provide some support for iPlatform to other stakeholders throughout the state. So Lauren is here too. She's an early user over the past couple of months of iPlatform, and we'll be here to kind of monitor the Q&A and maybe add some additional thoughts and answer questions too. So thank you, Lauren. And then, as hopefully you all know, I've been working with the department. I came to the department to work for maybe 6 months or a year, and that was about 20 years ago. So I've been around the department for quite some time. I remember the day when we didn't have a student level data collection, where all the data at the department was just aggregate, and we never ever could have done anything like we're doing now. So it's exciting to see that where we are today. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we're going to talk about, and I'll actually start right now, is what is iPlatform and kind of the purpose of it. And part of what I want to talk about is the fact that iPlatform now is a tool that is not only something that's being offered by the department, but it's now something being housed by the department. When iPlatform was first created a couple of years ago, it was a third party that was doing it. And one of the things that Dina has led is bringing that inside the department walls. So the content and the system we're looking at is something that the department has full control over. And that's a good thing, because it means that if there are enhancements and changes that we want to make to the system, it can happen. And I know Dina is constantly looking for feedback from folks to improve it. So as you're looking through this, if you're in a part of the Department of Education that has data that you think isn't included, but you think would be a great place to include it, let Dina know, let us know, and we can certainly, the goal will be to try to continue to enhance and build on the system. The agenda today is to talk kind of what the system's about. So I'll go through that fairly quickly. What does it look like? And I'll go through some PowerPoint slides or Google slides that help understand what it looks like. And then really, hopefully the bulk of the session will be going into a live demo and having you look at the system live and going through it. And again, please ask questions as we do. And then we'll talk a little bit about kind of what's coming over the course of the next year. You can't break the system. It's a system to display reports. And it's not a system that you can, corrupt the data or make, or break it in any which way. So please go in and play with it, try things out, Obviously, if you're struggling with something, reach out to us so you're not doing that. But definitely feel free, you should feel free to, and you should feel free to kind of play in the system and give it a try and look throughout it. I'm going to say one more thing about logistics, and that is that the presentation I'm giving you should also be a link to it in the chat session. So if you want the presentation, it's on a Google Drive and it's there for you to look at in the future. There are also some links in it, I think, to the iPlatform itself, and we'll talk about how to get to it in a few minutes. I'm going to pause for a quick second just to see if Lauren and Dina, is there anything I missed in terms of logistics, or should I keep going?
I don't think so, Mike. I think we should keep on going.
Great.
Yeah, we're good, Mike.
Great. So as I mentioned before, iPlatform, as I kind of started to mention, is a source of data. And the department, as you all know, especially over the past 5 to 10 years, has collected and been able to put together a really broad amount of data, a really large amount of data. And it's everything from data about ELA assessments to data about different regions of the state. It's data that looks at graduation rate information, proficiency. It's data that looks about what educators are in our state, what classes students are taking. So there's a whole, what university students are going to. There's a whole conglomerate of data that is stored within the department's websites in the data warehouse. And one of the main purposes of iPlatform is to make some sense of all that and put it back into the field, whether it's you folks who are supporting schools throughout the state, or whether it is a parent who's looking for a school for their child. And all of it is kind of brought together through iPlatform. The content and what drove iPlatform was kind of twofold. One was just federal requirements. Federal requirements require the department to report on certain information about schools. Schools are identified in, if you aren't aware, in 4 different categories. They can be good standing, or schools can be identified based on federal requirements as either a CSI school, an ATS school, or a TSI school. I'll talk about those in a minute. So part of what drove the need for iPlatform and what's reported in iPlatform is the federal requirements. And so you'll see that in the slide. I'm going to talk about some of the things that are required from a federal perspective to look at schools. You'll see that same data existing now in iPlatform. iPlatform was more than just meeting the federal requirements. So as we talked about before, it's the commissioner's desire to look for transparency and provide information for stakeholders. It's the desire to take information that's throughout our data warehouse in the state and different components and pull it together so you can look across different characteristics. So not just looking at state assessment tests, but looking at cost per pupil, or looking at English language proficiency, or other characteristics throughout the state. Class size, lots of different things. In terms of the federal requirements in these, the way you categorize schools, again, there's these 3 categories of schools. CSI schools are the schools that are struggling the most throughout the state. They're the bottom 5% of the schools in the state in terms of their performance academically, in graduation rate, and those characteristics. But it's across all students within the school. Because it's the bottom 5%, or the 5% that are struggling the most, that equates to about 12 schools for CSI, for elementary, and 1 really for high school. So it's not a lot of schools, but those are the schools that seem to really be struggling. ATS are schools that have a subgroup. So it's a population such as your special education population, or your students who are receiving free and reduced lunch. So students just financially in poverty. If any one of those groups is performing at the same level as the CSI schools, that struggling level, then they're identified as ATS. And then TSI are schools that have a subgroup, again, might be special ed, might be free and reduced, might be limited English proficient, who over the course of 2 years are really showing struggling throughout the entire state. So for 2 years in a row, there are some of the lowest schools in the state for that subgroup, then they're identified as TSI. There are about, as I mentioned, there's actually about 20 CSI schools. There's about 85 or so ATS schools and about 9 CSI schools. We could have a whole hour just on ATS, TSI, and CSI. We're not going to. The reason, again, I want to point out is, again, because of these indicators that are used to determine those categories. So the indicators include things for elementary, like academic achievement. So you'll see what percentage of students are proficient in math and ELA. Growth percentile. So are students growing in terms of how much they're learning? Even if they're doing well in school, are they still growing more? English language proficiency, and then school quality. School quality is an equity indicator. It looks at helping hold the schools accountable for how they're supporting the lowest performing students within their school. So whoever's struggling the most in your school, how are those students in particular doing? Those are the indicators for elementary, and you'll see those indicators appear when we go into iPlatform. At the high school level, it's similar as academic achievement. That's measured by the NH, by the SAT assessment. Graduation rate. As many of you know, graduation rate is fairly high in New Hampshire. We do a really good job collectively as helping ensure students graduate from high school, but that's another indicator. English language proficiency as well. And then there's something called the college and career readiness indicator. And that's looking at helping make sure that students are ready, whether they're ready to go to college or whether they're ready to go to a trade, or whatever their next step's going to be, military, et cetera. So the data that was used to determine those federal requirements, as well as other data we have in the department, is now brought into iPlatform and Iexplore. Those are the iReport and Iexplore. Those are the two main components of iPlatform. So there's something called iReport, and iReport is basically a report card. It's a report card that says, for my given school or my district, how am I doing overall? How am I doing in things like achievement? What's my educator profile look like? Do I have teachers who are experienced, or do I have teachers that are mostly beginning teachers? Financially, what does our school look like, or our district look like? So iReport is kind of this report card for a school or district. And then Iexplore is an area to explore some of those indicators. So, maybe you are looking at your school and you see that your school is a school that has a large population of students who are on free and reduced lunch. So that's one of the things you found in your report. Well, you can jump to Iexplore and now discover or explore schools across the state and look at how schools across the state, what schools across the state have a similar demographic in terms of a large portion of students on free and reduced lunch. And then once you've done that, you can look at other indicators for those schools and see how they compare to your school. So Iexplore lets you explore these different characteristics. So that's kind of an idea of what the basis of iPlatform, both kind of why it was put in place and what data is within it. Let's take a quick look at what it looks like. And I'll go through 2 or 3 slides, and then again, we'll jump right into it. So to get to iPlatform, you're going to go to NH, you can just Google NH DOE iPlatform. You can also go to the bottom of the website, there's an iPlatform link. And you'll see on that page, there's 3 things I want to point out. One is that there's a link to iReport, which we just talked about, the report card. There's a link to Iexplore, and then there's also a link to iPlatform training and resources. So if you click on that link, you'll actually see a list of some of the trainings that are coming up over the course of this, this spring, end of the winter and spring. So I encourage you to come back here and look at those, or take a look at those as well. When you launch iPlatform, so if I clicked, iReport, if you've gone to iReport, like I said, iReport is a report card for a school or district. So the first thing you have to do is select the school or district. Once you've done that, you view the report, and we'll go a live demo and we'll see what that looks like in a minute. That iReport, this is the first page of that iReport. So once you go and you choose a school, if I choose a district here in Manchester, you'll see, just as I talked about before, just as that screen showed before, there's these different characteristics about, from a report card perspective, about that school. So there's an overall profile, there's an overview, there's achievement about the school, the environment of the school, and educator, and we'll go through each one of these tabs. That's the way you drive through iReport those. You'll see these tabs on top of the page. If we clicked on Iexplore, so on the screen here, if we clicked on the Iexplore, that's how you get one way to get into Iexplore. As I mentioned before, this basically lets you explore different characteristics. So here we're exploring cost per pupil across the entire state. The Explore function gives you, again, through tabs, about 6 different things that you can look at. You can explore different characteristics, you can compare schools, you can discover schools that might match a certain characteristic you want, download data, et cetera. And again, we'll go through all that detail. So what you'll see, and for those of you who have already been in Iexplore or iPlatform before, iReport or Iexplore before, some of the things you'll see different now. There's better and improved integration between iReport and Iexplore. So now if you're in the report card and you're looking at a certain characteristic like % proficient or some other characteristic about schools, you can jump to Iexplore directly from iReport. You will see some cool hovering. So I encourage you, and you'll see as I go through it and I move my cursor over certain fields, things will pop up and you'll have more detail about information. It's a lot of longitudinal data that you'll see pop up. So that's the neat stuff that you'll see that you didn't see before. There's some improved downloading options to be able to download data. This is now more mobile friendly. So if you're trying to access this on a mobile device, that's been an improvement. There is some Essa data at the district and state level. It includes some improvement fund information. So you can see for those schools, like those CSI schools, what funds are they receiving to provide support for those schools. There's great printed report cards. And so, for example, if you are a title person and you're going out to visit a school or do a site visit, highly recommend coming out and printing out the report card so you'll have it with you when you go. And then there's some training videos. So throughout the system, you'll see training videos that you can link to get some more information about some different functions within iPlatform or iReport. Okay, so now we're going to do a live demo. I'm going to pause for a second just to see if there's any questions. And I'm going to look through my slides to make sure there's nothing I missed.
So Mike, we don't have any questions at this time.
Okay, and I'm going to start doing the demo. So in the presentation, I gave you a little cheat sheet. So again, hopefully you'll focus on the demo right now, but this is in the presentation. So if you want to think about, go through the different slides or the different system itself, this kind of can give you some examples of some of the things I'm going to point out along the way. So I'm going to flip over now to the actual system. Two other caveats, actually, two other things as we do this. So first thing, actually, I'm going to do, let me escape out of the presentation view. As I mentioned before, easiest way to find this, and this is for you to tell other folks, you just type in iPlatform, NH, in Google. First thing that's going to come up is iPlatform. Click on iPlatform, and this is that screen I showed you before that lets you get into iReport or Iexplore, as well as the training. I'm going to give you a kind of a forewarning. There are some issues right now with the performance of iPlatform. iPlatform was put on the same server as the COVID system for the state of New Hampshire. So we are competing with all the people that are looking for tests and vaccines and the like. So as a result, there may be some performance issues. Because of that, I'm going to actually run it from the VPN within the department in the test site. But if you do have some performance issues, know that it's being addressed by OIT right now, DOIT, along with some changes that Dean and the team's going to make internally. So know that those will hopefully go away shortly if you do find any performance issues, and do let us know as you do, just so that we can understand the magnitude. But I am going to run this again from within the VPN. So here I actually let me back up a slide so we can do this. Can't do that. Let me, not a slide, but let me go back to the main page.
On the same page, Mike, you can just hit back to Finder at the top.
Great. Thank you, Dina. So I'm going to go into the report card. I'm just going to choose Kennett Middle School, the first one that defaults, and we're going to view the report. So I'm not picking on Kennett other than the fact that A Crosby Kennett puts them at the top of the alphabet. So the first thing, the first page you land on is a profile, and this gives you some profile information. It shows you where the school is located in the state graphically. It gives you who's the current principal. It gives you the population of the students. As you can see, and as I talked about before, as you hover over things, you will see frequently pop-ups. So here's a pop-up that shows you not just the enrollment today, but it shows what the enrollment's been over the past 3 years. So we can see that there's been a decline from 296 to 241. This may be COVID related, not certain, but that, that is information it gives you. On the profile screen, you will see demographic broken down. So what percentage of the students in the school are economically disadvantaged? What percentage of the students are students with disabilities? Again, you hover over these and you see some more information. Here we see a breakout over the years as well. So you can see that for economically disadvantaged, they've been somewhere between 42 and 40% for the past 3 years, so fairly steady in terms of their poverty and the demographics of their population. The other thing I want to point out is that sometimes you'll see star N, sometimes you'll see NA. Those indicate basically that there's not enough data to show you. Either NA, which currently I think means there's probably no data whatsoever, so maybe there's no migrant students whatsoever, to where you see star N, which indicates that there's too few students for us to report. For FERPA requirements to make sure we're protecting the privacy of students, the way the system is designed right now, if there's less than 11 students in a group, we won't show you that information. And that's again to protect the privacy. Some of that work is being modified or reviewed, but that's what these things represent right now. You'll also see cases where it says less than 10%, where we are showing you percentages. Frequently, if there's less than 10 or more than 90, you'll see just that information, less than 10. You won't see the specific number. Again, that's to protect the privacy of the students. We've done our best. Dina's done our best, and we're trying to do our best in terms of giving you as much information as possible without, again, jeopardizing anybody's privacy from their data. Lauren, I saw a hand raised or something. Are we good? Or let me know if there's anything. The other thing I just, let me see if there's anything else I want to point out on this page.
So Mike, before you go on, we do have a hand raised by Tamara. I would ask you to type your question into the chat, Tamara. And then Melissa White and Dina. Dina, was that question resolved with Melissa?
I think Melissa just wants Mike to show how you get to the state report from iReport, because they get a lot of questions and they don't know how to access the state report.
Great. And you're talking about the state.
The link at the bottom. Yep.
Yeah, I can definitely do that.
Thank you, Dina.
And thank you, Melissa, for the question. The other thing I just want to point out before I do that is, as we're going to see, again, and as I've talked about, these tabs then drive the report cards. We're going to go to each one of these tabs to see the different types of functionality. As Dina and Melissa were alluding to, there is also a state report. So if I click on this state report at the bottom here, it's going to open up a new page. And this new page is going to be the iReport at the state level. And so just the way we can see the results for a local school, we can see the results for the state. So again, we can see, economically disadvantaged across the entire state. We're at about 24%. It's dropped off from 28% to 24% since 2019. We know some of that may be COVID related in terms of the inability for schools to identify students who are eligible. But that gives you that trend. Same thing with disabilities. We can see the trend of disabilities over time. So this is a way for you to look at the state. And you'll find, and we'll talk about this, like when you're looking at a given school, you may want to know how does that school compare to the state. There are ways to do that through Iexplore, but in terms of the report card, frequently it's nice just to go to the state report and see that difference there.
Mike, just a question about enrollment numbers, going back just as far as that, right? The 3 years.
Yeah, so on this page, you see that 3-year enrollment. You can go school year up here, and thanks for making me remind me to point this out. And you can choose prior years. So I can choose 2018 and look at the Crosby Kennett Middle School back in 2018. Now that it's back in 2018, you should be able to see prior years, but I'm not seeing it. So Dean, I don't know.
So the data, the data goes back only till 2018 in Iexplore. We only have, so if you, when you select the school year, it always gives you 3 years back to the maximum data that we have in Iexplore. But the idea is that the trend will always give you only 3 years unless we only have 1 or 2, depending on the year you choose for the report card.
So it looks like right now it goes as far back as 2018. So let's go to the overview section. So profile was just kind of demographics about the school, content of who's there. Overview is now going to give us some basic information about the next tabs. So we'll see student achievement, environment, we see school environment, educator, we see educator. So this is kind of an overview, just as it says, of the next sets of tabs. Couple of things to point out on this. So as an example for student achievement, this is showing us that 44% of the school, Kennett Middle School, was proficient on the English language assessment. 22% were proficient on math. This is overall looking for the entire school across all grades. If you hover over these things, again, some great information. You can see the information both for ELA, math, and science longitudinally over the course of a few years. For those of you who don't know, 2020, we didn't offer the state assessment. So that's why you'll see like COVID as the, star COVID as the value. You'll also see sometimes star CS, this means coming soon. And this data is because we don't have it in the system yet, and we'll talk more about when that financial data is coming in. Some nice attributes that you'll see. Color means something throughout these screens. In this case, you'll see blue, gray, and orange. You'll see that in other places throughout the system where when we want to represent whether the school's attribute is in the lowest 25% across the state, in the middle 50% across the state, or in the upper 25% across the state, you'll see certain colors. So on this screen, gray always means they're in the middle. Orange means they're in the lower 25%. So what this is saying is across the state, looking at all the schools in the state, 22% of the students are proficient for Kennett. That's in the lowest 25% of schools in the state. 75% of the schools in the state have a higher math proficiency. And again, I apologize for picking on Kennett, but that's what that is telling you. On the other hand, and this isn't necessarily something that is the part of the idea with this lowest, middle, and higher is not to do a value judgment. It's just a fact. So for classes taught by educators on an intern, so these are teachers who are working on their teacher license. They're in an intern situation where they're kind of being monitored right now. They have one of the higher. They're in the higher top 25% of schools in the state in terms of the number of teachers who are on an intern path as they're teaching. Again, not a value judgment. If you're somebody who's fiscally conservative in your town, you might say that's a good thing. They're probably less expensive. If you're somebody who feels like experience matters, you might feel like that's not a good thing. So it's really just an indicator to provide information. I think that's probably all I need to show on this screen. You'll also see the status, as we talked about before, this federal status. So this school evidently is one that has additional targeted support and TSI. So this is a school that had a subpopulation that was struggling quite a bit. Most schools, when they've got a subpopulation, it's typically their special education population in terms of determining ATS and TSI. Sometimes it might also be something like an economically disadvantaged group. Okay. Well, the other thing I wanted to point out is this description. One of the nice things that Dina and the folks have included is on the top of each one of these tabs, you'll see a description of what that tab is describing, what this page is describing. It's really helpful. So, take the time to read through that and get a sense of what it is you should be seeing on that page. Okay. Next page we'll go to is achievement. So achievement gives us just what it says, gives you achievement on the state assessment test. It gives you not just what's required for determining those Essa requirements, which is math and ELA, but it also includes science information. And it also includes things like information about English language proficiency as well. You will see on the next several tabs, achievement, environment, educator, you'll see a similar layout, and that's again very intentional. The hope is that once you understand one screen, you'll be able to understand the other screens, and the data will make more sense to you. You will typically see information about whatever you're looking at. So this is achievement overall. You'll typically see information that's called whatever the area is, like achievement in context. And in context means let's help you understand what this data looks like compared to the district or compared to the school. So it helps put your results, Kennett Middle School, in context to the overall district, in context to the overall school, overall state. You will also typically see longitudinal data. So you'll typically see whatever we're looking at, like achievement in this case, you'll typically see it over multiple years, over 3 years. And then you'll typically see a little bit more detail. And so you'll see the same kind of setup when we go to environment and go to educator. You'll see a similar environment, a similar setup. In addition to the hovering that we talked about, there's also these things that are kind of call outs that detail the information and bring a pop-up that gives you, or flyout that gives you some more information. Let me take a second just to go through this a little bit more slowly, because I tend to, I have it obviously all in my head, so sometimes I feel like I'm going to go through it too quick. So what we're looking at here is assessment proficiency by subject. So it's ELA, math, and science. It's for Kennett Middle School, and it's the percentage of students who were proficient in ELA. So 44% of their kids in 2021 were proficient in ELA. 22% of their students were proficient in math, and 25% of their students were proficient in science. You'll see this thing called the state target. This is not an average. This doesn't tell you the state average, it just tells you a target. This is a target that per the Essa plan, the state has to say, this is what we want everybody to achieve across the state. So they're below the target, but that don't mix that with average. As Melissa mentioned before, there is the state report. So if you go to the state report, which we have open here, and I click on achievement, this is an easy way to see what the average is for the state. So just the way we saw at Kennett, they're 44% ELA proficient. At the state level, they're 52%. So that's the state average. Another way to do it would be to look over here. I can see here that Kennett is 44%, the state is 52%. So hopefully that 52% matches 52%, which it does here. The flyout then breaks this information and gives you more detail. So it says for ELA, we're 44% overall for the school, but how are we doing for economically disadvantaged students? Well, we're really only 30% of those students are proficient. For students with disability, only 14% of those students students with disability are proficient. It also breaks it out by grade. So how are our 7th grades doing versus our 8th grade? So here, although we saw 44 overall, we can see actually our 7th grade is doing quite a bit better than our 8th grade, Kennett. So it gives you a little bit more information. If you wanted to see the state average here, then right now you'd have to do just what we saw before. You'd have to go to the state level, we could do the flyout for the state. And here we could see from 7th to 8th grade, there's a slight drop here, but state average is 51 and 49. For Kennett, they were at 49, which is close to the state average, but much lower for grade 8. So that's a little more information, although they're far behind overall as a school compared to what we saw as the state. In fact, their 7th grade is pretty close to the state average, and really their 8th grade is where they're struggling a little bit more. So it's just a little bit more information that you can glean out of drilling down through these flyouts. The other thing I need to point out is when you open up a flyout, it pops up. To close the flyout, you've got to click back on the arrow, and that shrinks it back and disappears. So make sure you click it again if you want it to go away. We talked before about the concept of integrating between iPlatform and iReport and Iexplore. Whenever you see these down arrows, these are telling you that you can jump from iReport for this given school where you're looking at achievement to Iexplore when you can explore across the entire state. And so let me just do that. So I'm in Iexplore, I'm looking at the achievement results for Kennett. I want to know more about the ELA proficiency across the entire state. So I click on that link, it opens up a new tab, and now it's going to bring me into Iexplore specifically for that same indicator, which was ELA, but now it's showing me the ELA performance for every school or every district throughout the state. I'm going to get into more detail about what it's showing you on the right, but just understand that this now is giving us a lot of information across the entire state about that indicator that we were looking at, the ELA performance. More information for achievement level, where now we say there's 44% of the kids are proficient. But what does that mean? Proficiency is actually broken down into 4 different categories. You can either be way below, substantially below proficient is level 2. You can be proficient, which is 3, or highly proficient, which is 4. So of these, we know that 44% of the students are proficient. That means that there's 56% who's not proficient. And that 56 actually breaks out into 27% at level 1 and 29% at level 2. Add that up and it's 56%. So just a way to understand a little bit more detail, are all these kids just on the border? Maybe they're close to level 3 or all being proficient, or maybe the kids who aren't proficient are, where do they mix here? You can see in science, for example, most of the kids who are not proficient are substantially below proficient, are really struggling. So it gives you a little bit more detail about the level of proficiency within the different assessments. As I mentioned earlier, although it's coming out, it's going to be coming out soon. The English language access result proficiency will also be here. We've got a substantial number of students who are English is not their first language and they're getting support. So this helps you understand how they are on track to achieving their proficiency throughout the state as well. So that'll be coming soon. Okay, any questions or anything I missed before while I check my notes to see if there's anything else I wanted to say?
So there's no questions. We just have some nice feedback in the chat about the amazing amount of data presented in a really nice, readable, accessible, visually appealing manner, excuse me. So thanks to Dina and her team and everyone really who's worked so hard on this platform.
Thank you, Lauren. Okay, environment. So the next tab is environment. So again, just as we saw before, overall indicator information, longitudinal information, context information. How does their numbers relate to the school, relate to the district and the state? So similar format, similar theme with colors. Here we see green is for in-school suspensions, yellow is for out-of-school suspensions, and red is for expulsion. You'll see those same colors here. Green is in school, yellow is out of school, and red is expulsions. For those of you who are observant, you might have seen in achievement, there are colors for math, science, and ELA, and those colors stick with math, science, and ELA. I'm not going to go back there, but you can think and look to see if you're right, because we'll probably go back there later if anyone remembers what those colors were. So the indicators around environment include suspension. So it's number of percentage of students who were, or the amount of in-school suspension, the rate, out-of-school suspension, and expulsion. Most of our schools in the state have fairly low suspension rates, but obviously there's some that will have higher. One interesting thing that I noticed as I was preparing for this is looking at this over time. The suspension rate for Kennett Kennett Middle School between 2019 and 2021 went way down. That's what we most likely would expect during a period of COVID with a lot of virtual learning. The number of kids that are suspended is the behavior issues last year went way down, in part because people weren't in school, and the folks who were in school were typically in smaller pods. So that's a factor. And if we want to say, well, is that something that's similar trend to the state, then we could do, again, kind of like what Melissa was suggesting before, we could go to the state report. I think I actually have it open over here. And if you looked at the environment for the state, we will see the same thing. You will see that the trend over the past 3 years for suspensions was a trend going down. And I'm sorry, it didn't bring up the right page. Try it again. There we go. So you can see again, the trend was way down for the state in terms of the number of suspensions in school and out of school. Something that obviously, if you're in a school, if you are in the Office of Wellness in this Department of Ed and SEL and student behaviors, your primary focus, you are probably thinking, what is going to happen to this? You probably expect that this may change fairly drastically over the course of the next couple of years as students come back and have more behavior problems potentially than they had before. And we want to keep an eye on how that is translating to suspensions. So again, a lot of good information. Other information on this page, I think, for the most part, it's similar to what we saw before. I think in interest of time, I would probably continue on to the next page. I do want to point out, one of the things that's so great about iPlatform, just from my perspective, thinking about all the people and all the folks of you on the call and people doing work throughout the department, this is such a good example of pulling data, not this page in particular, but iReport in general, of pulling data from all different divisions within the department. We have data from the NESIS and IEP folks. There's data from free and reduced. There's data from limiting proficient students. There's data from teacher certification. All of that coming together to provide the data in one place. So just, for some reason, I had a note in this slide that I just wanted to mention that because I do think it's something pretty impressive in terms of all the work that all of you have done in the department to collect all this. Educator, let me go to the educator tab. Educator tab, once again, in context, overall data, longitudinal data, same as we've seen on the other screens. The indicators for educator profile includes the percentage of teachers who are certified in the subject they're teaching or the percentage of classes. So basically, good example, we collect class information in the I4C system. We meld that with information from the teacher certification system, and we're able to say for all the classes that are being taught, how many of them are being taught by teachers who are certified in that subject. In New Hampshire, you don't have to be certified for every class you teach. You're supposed to be certified for the majority of the classes you teach, but you could be a physics teacher teaching physics for 4 classes and 1 class of chemistry that you're not certified in. That type of information is then brought here through coming up with a percentage of classes that are not taught by teachers who are certified. Classes taught by teachers on an interim license, we saw that before. 23% is fairly high. I think most across the state you typically see a lower number. And then experienced educators. So what percentage of the educators in the district are experienced? Experience typically means you've been teaching in the area for 3 years and you've been deemed effective in your teaching evaluations. We also have cost average teacher salary, so that's here as well. And you can see that longitudinally. Later, we'll take a look at that in Iexplore across the state. I'm looking at the clock, so I'm just going to keep on going. Finance data. One thing to point out, two things that I need to point out actually right now that I didn't mention earlier. One is that the data that you're going to see may differ if you're looking at a school or you're looking at a district. We're looking at a school right now, and so you see, well, two things. You're not seeing data because the finance hasn't been out for 2021, but if I bring it back to 2019, for example, you'll see finance data. But the other thing is that finance data is reported to the department through the group in the department that collects finance data at the district level for the most part. Some is at the school level, but most of it's at the district level. So there's not a whole lot of data here when you're looking at a school. But if I change, instead of looking at a school, if I choose to look at the district, you'll see all of a sudden, there's going to be a lot more information here about the finances. So an important thing to remember is that when you're looking at this data, it may give you a little bit different information if you're looking at a district than if you're looking at a school. So now we're seeing all of a sudden at the district level, we can tell you what percentage of the funding goes to transportation, for example, or what percentage of the funding goes to the plant operations, what percentage of the funding comes from adequacy funding. So a lot of good information. The other thing that I forgot to mention is that the tabs themselves will also differ depending on what you're looking at. So if you're looking at a district, you see college. If you're looking at a high school, you might see college information. If you're looking at an elementary school, you won't see the college information. So realize that those tabs may not be appearing because of the fact that you're looking at an elementary school or that you're looking at high school, et cetera. Let me keep going on. So let me go to, I think from here, I'm going to go to growth. So we're going to skip Essa for a minute. Growth gives us what's called the growth factor. This is calculated based on the state assessment test. It's strictly calculated based on the NH which is given to grades 3 through 8. So you have to have 2 years of results from an assessment to determine growth. And what growth lets the state do, lets all of you do, is look at how schools are doing in terms of their instruction for students, regardless of whether that student is struggling or whether that student is doing really well. So even for folks who are doing well, they're proficient on their assessment, are they still improving compared to other kids around the state who are similar? So the growth factor allows us to look at students in a school, and for each one of those individual students, look at how they perform compared to similar students from throughout the state, and determine whether they're improving compared to similar kids around the state. So it's a good factor to use whether you're looking at a school that's doing well or whether you're looking at a school that's struggling. The average growth would be 50. So if you're doing just average across the state in terms of how your students are improving, you'd expect a 50th growth percentile. Anything below there, like 43 here, means that they're not growing as fast as other schools are growing similar types of students. Hover over here, similar we saw before, you can actually see that they've had that growth percentile fairly similar for many years. A couple of things to point out: if you're a smaller school, if you're a school that has a small number of students, that growth factor can change fairly quickly from one year to the other. So realize that that does have an impact. The other thing I wanted to point out is we mentioned earlier that there's information about what you're looking at here at the top of the screen. So this describes growth percentile. There are also places where you'll see this little eye. And so if you hover over that, let me plug my computer in before we lose me completely. So you will also find areas where you can hover over the eye and you can see some additional information. So this actually, if you hover over it, this will show us some more detail about what mean growth percentile actually means and kind of a little bit about how it's calculated. So I encourage you to take a look at those help items throughout the document or throughout the system. Any other questions so far, Lauren or Dina? Anything I missed?
No questions. I think you're still working in 2019. I don't know if you wanted to come back to 21, but just wanted to let you know.
Thanks. That's good. I may switch back in a minute. In 2021, we don't have growth.
Right.
There was no test last year. That's why I stayed in here, but thank you. The other thing I asked before, what color is math and what color is ELA. If any of you have been thinking about it yourselves, so red is always ELA throughout the system, blue is always math. So again, Dina tried to include some consistency to make things jump out a little bit more out and make it a little more obvious. College. So college, again, is only going to be found at the district level or the high school level. College indicators, again, as we see before, they have over time, they have college information and context. The indicators we report about college include a 4-year graduation year, a 5-year graduation rate, post-secondary enrollment, so what percentage of students are enrolled in post-secondary, and dropout rate. New Hampshire does a great job at, all folks in schools do a great job at in helping ensure kids are graduating. We've got one of the higher graduation rates, I believe, across the country. So for the most part, you should see fairly high numbers. Post-secondary enrollment, we typically do pretty well as well. And so you'll see well in terms of, if that's not me making a judgment, but we've seen that we typically have a large number of students who are enrolled in post-secondary. The dropout rates are usually pretty low. But this is good information to have. Again, if you're going out to work with a charter school or work with a school, this is helpful that you might want to do before you start. Last couple of items here before we jump to Iexplore is Essa, and I am going to really race through these. Essa, as I mentioned earlier, just gives us the overall indicators, those things that we talked about before: achievement, college readiness, English language proficiency, and it tells you where the school rated in a ranking of 1 to 4, 1 being low. And I can tell you more about that another time if you have questions about it. IDEA is information about special education students, and so a great collaboration with the Special Ed Bureau department in developing iPlatform. And the indicators, let me switch maybe to, no, the indicators for IDEA are reported here. And so these are more information about how special education students are performing throughout the state. And you can click on one of these expansion arrows and you see that information about the results. If you get rid, you click again to hide it, and you can see the different indicator values. I'm not going to go through all these. I don't know these that well, but this is wonderful information about the performance of schools in terms of their special education population. Last thing I think I want to point out here is the downloadability. This is a great function. And so again, I mentioned before, if you're going to go out to a school district and you want to know kind of the profile of the school, you can click on that download and very quickly, for example, get a detailed report that you can print out as a PDF for that school or that district. I don't know if it's going to open up right now, but this basically brings you up to a PDF. Should open, but maybe not. It brings you up to a PDF document that you can print out. One of the really nice things that Dina did is when that document comes up, it actually tells you how to set your print settings to make sure that you print it out correctly. Like, should you print out landscape or portrait? Different characteristics to set in your printer specifications. So a great tool. Okay. So with that, I'm going to jump to Iexplore. As I mentioned before, there's multiple ways to do it. One way would be to go back to the home page and just go from the department's website directly into Iexplore. The other way we could do it is to go, for example, from achievement. And so I could, actually, let me do it from Educator. I think Educator has some good data in iPlatform too, if I remember correctly. So here, I can click on this little link and I can look at, maybe I was interested in, we talked before about teachers who are on an intern plan. How does my school compare to others? So I can click classes taught by experience. I guess I'll do that instead. So this is going to show me the percentage of students of classes that are taught by experienced educators across the entire state. And so very quickly, I can look at my school versus others. So different than iReport, where we're really focused on one district or one school, Iexplore gives us information across the entire state for all schools. Give it just a second to come up, and if it doesn't here, I might switch over to and close some of my other tabs too, because I got too much open here. Well, let me bring this that page up that was open before and see if we can continue to use this a little bit. Let me see if I can switch indicators. So, for example, before we were looking at proficiency. If I switch to what I said before, which we were talking about classes taught by an experienced educator, let's see if the screen wants to come back a little faster. Well, let me try one more option while we're waiting on that. I'm going to go in here and we're going to try to go to the test site rather than the production site of this. Okay, so here we are, and again, you know, it might be that 253 people are rushing to get their COVID vaccine scheduled or something. So the production site was a little slow. So now let's try on this test site. So again, I can switch here and we could look at classes taught by experienced educators, and this now should update. And so now what we're looking at is for all the schools in the state, what percentage of students are classes are taught by experienced educators. I had been looking at, we've been looking at Conway, for example, so I can type in Conway here, and this will allow me to highlight Conway. And so now we see Conway is right here. So I can see where Conway is compared to the rest of the state in terms of percentage of students and percentage of classes taught by experienced educators. Let me talk a little bit more about the screen because it's going to be, it's probably a little confusing right now. This screen showing two things. It's showing one indicator. So in this case, we're currently looking at classes taught by experienced educators. And then it's showing that indicator compared to number of percentage of students proficient in math and ELA. So you will see on the Explore tab, you will always see the x-axis here showing the percentage of students proficient in math and ELA. The y-axis will always show whatever indicator you have here on the left. So in this case, I selected classes by experienced educator. And what we see here is this school, for example, had 25% of their students proficient, and they have 38% of their students or so classes taught by experienced educators, 33%. So it allows you to look, for example, is there a relationship between experience of educators and proficiency in the results? And what we see here is there's a slight increase in this line, which would might tell you that you have, as you've got more experience, you've got more students proficient. However, it's really important that you look at what's called this Pearson R value. The R value, it's a statistical term, and it tells you whether the correlation you're looking at has a strong relationship. And it has to be closer to 0.8 as opposed to 0.18 to indicate a strong relationship. It has to be at least something like 0.5 or above 0.5 to even have a moderate relationship. So what it's telling us, it's not finding any relationship in the group of schools we're looking at, or districts we're looking at, between these two characteristics. And you can see for a given percent of students, like 60% of the students proficient, there are some schools that have low percentage of classes taught by experienced educators and some that have a higher percentage. And so you can see that it really doesn't seem to correlate. The other thing that's really important to point out is that correlation does not equal causation. So even if you see something correlate, it doesn't mean that that's the cause of why that other thing is happening. But anyway, this is some information that is valuable to look at. Let me take a look at a couple other things. So we might, for example, and the other nice thing, so we might, for example, look at the same thing based on class size. So we could look at average class size and say, does a smaller class seem to imply an improved change? And again, we can see now there's not a correlation based on what we're seeing here between class size and proficiency. The other nice thing, some other nice things you can do in this page is maybe you're working with schools in the North Country, and so you're really not concerned about the entire state. You want to look at the North Country. So one thing you can do is say, I want to look at schools across the state. But for schools across the state, I only want to look at schools in the North Country. So you can actually choose the region for schools and say, I only want to look at schools in the North Country. We noticed when we were preparing this that there's one school that must have some invalid data. And so I think Christy Chu, the department, is already on the lookout to figure out why that's happening. But that's why you're seeing one record, and it's really confounding the rest of the page. But if I just say the North Country, we're not looking at that school anymore. And this is now showing us the the information about the schools just in the North Country. So a lot of different things you can do on the screen. And again, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to have to go. In addition to exploring indicators versus proficiency, I'm going to jump to the Discover page. The Discover page lets us discover correlations or relationships between indicators that have nothing to do with proficiency. So for example, maybe we want to look at class size versus cost per pupil. So hopefully we can get to this page. Yep. So here I can choose two indicators, and I can choose class size, which I believe is a school environment variable, if I'm remembering correctly, class size. And then I can choose for my second area, and I go to minimize it. I can choose cost per pupil, and that's a financial indicator. I'm going to choose cost per pupil. And now we don't have data for 2021, so I'm going to have to go back a year again. I'll go back 2 years. But here you can see that here, in fact, we are seeing that there does seem to be a bit stronger relationship. It says 0.55. So that tells you there is at least a moderate relationship between cost per pupil and class size. And that's what you might expect, right? Smaller classes are more expensive. But we also could take a look at, again, cost per pupil and achievement. And I think you'll end up finding that there's not a correlation, at least in the population of students we're looking at. In an interest of time, again, I'm going to have to not show you that right now, but it is there. You could also could highlight a given school. So if we want to look for a given school, we could do that as well. If you hover over districts, districts here or schools here, you'll see detail. So here you can see all the characteristics about this given school. So again, use the hover to find out more information. A couple more things in Iexplore as we're trying, I know I'm going to go over a few minutes over, but let me go through a few more things. Compare lets you compare multiple entities. So here I can compare a district, maybe Bedford, and this is another place to look at information about a district or a school versus the state. Because one of the things you can compare against is the state. So if I scroll down, and I can probably even click the letter S, will jump me down to S's. We can see there's the state of New Hampshire. And so if I choose state of New Hampshire, I can now compare Bedford or any school or district to the state. And so here we can look at all the characteristics, whether it's academic growth or achievement or college and career readiness, all these different indicators we can see looking at Bedford versus the state of New Hampshire. So another good way to see how you're doing versus, or how a school is doing versus the state. The next item I want to show you is search. Search is one of my favorite functions in the system. And this is something I encourage you as a title, if maybe you're a title officer helping schools with some title funding, or a special education person helping schools with students on IEPs. This is a great way to find schools around the state that might be similar to a school you're working with. So for example, I'm going to choose math proficiency. So I want to look at how schools are doing in math. So I'm going to choose proficiency in math. I'm going to look at schools and understand look at their economically disadvantaged students. What percentage of their students are economically disadvantaged? I'm going to look at total enrollment, because maybe I'm only concerned with schools that have a sizable population. And then maybe I also want to include experienced educators, just to get an idea of how experienced the educators are. This screen then shows me all the schools and what their proficiency is. So here, Rye had an 83% proficiency rate. It shows you what percentage of their students are economically disadvantaged, what their enrollment is, et cetera. Well, maybe I'm helping schools with high populations of disadvantaged students. So I very easily can just change this filter here. And I can say, I only want to look at schools with at least 40% of their population is free and reduced, because that's the population of students that that the school I'm working with has, and I want to look for similar schools around the state. And maybe I only care about schools that have at least 100 students in their school, because I'm looking at a school that has a little bit more size to it than a really small school. So now all of a sudden this list is filtered out. So I'm seeing proficiency, but I'm only seeing it for schools that have at least 40% of the students on free and reduced, and I'm only seeing it for schools that have at least 100 students. And so it's a great way to say very quickly. And right now, I think we're looking at districts, but I could switch it to schools. So it's a great way to say, what are the schools out there that have high percent proficiency, but yet they've got a large population of free and reduced students and a good number of students in the school. And so, this very quickly lets me zero in on Williams Allen, Gonick School, et cetera. So a great way to look for schools around the state that meet certain characteristics. It's a really nice tool. The last couple of things, there is a download data, so you can download this, any attribute you want in the state, you can choose that attribute, whether it's average class size or whether it's dropout rate. You can choose which schools you want the information for. So you can say, I only want dropout rate for high schools because that's really where we calculate dropout rate. You can say, I want it for a certain year, and then you can download that data to a CSV. If you've got questions about the different types of data like dropout rate, go to definitions, and definitions gives you information about the different characteristics, everything from dropout rate to what it means to be teaching with experience, et cetera. So you can look at all these different indicators and find out where is that data collected, what does it mean, a little bit more information about it. All right, as I pause through to see if there's anything else I really need to show you before people sign off, I'm going to ask Lauren if there's any other questions, Gina, if there's anything else you wanted to highlight, and then I'm going to spend 2 or 3 more minutes, and I appreciate folks staying over a little bit.
No questions.
Okay. So the last things I want to do, and I apologize, that we couldn't go through it more, and I'll look for feedback. If one of your feedbacks is spend more time, make this longer, I can do that. We can do that next time, so let us know. But this handout's here. Some of the things that I highlighted are on here, so please take a look at it. I wanted to also point out that although we didn't have time, we put together some scenarios that we thought might be meaningful for you within the department. So if you're a Title I coordinator or support person, and you want to understand the school you're supporting, how they did in math, where do you go? You go to iReport, and I was going to walk you through it, but maybe you give it a try yourself and see if you can find out where you get that data. Or if you want to know what their teacher-student ratio is, you go to compared to the state average, or which ones are below the state average, you could go to Iexplore. So you might take these scenarios and walk through them yourselves and see if you can figure out how to get this information. Again, if you're having troubles, reach out. I'm more than happy to help. Talking about help, we also have some helpful hints. So we put this together, and these are just some things throughout the system that you might want to remember. Things like the fact that blue, gray, and orange represent top, middle, and lower quartiles. Things to the fact that you want to hover and look for things over when you're hovering. Make sure you choose the right year when you're looking at the information. So good bits that you might want to consider as you're going through the system. So last piece, what's coming? So what's coming in February, there's going to be more data loaded to the system. So coming sometime next month, we should have financial, Dina's going to have financial and post-secondary data loaded as well. There may be some grade-to-grade proficiency ability. So before when I was showing, if you wanted to look at the state grade results versus a local school, you had to jump to the state report. That's going to be embedded right in the report card. So hopefully by February, you'll actually be able to see how did the school do compared to the state at a given grade level, not just for the overall school. IDEA data and charter comparison is going to be coming out in April. So there'll be some information helping you understand how does charter schools doing compared to where those schools from where those students would have been coming if they weren't in the charter school. There'll be some more detailed dashboards for achievement and growth, new indicators coming up in June. And then next year, we'll have all the data coming back in again. We'll be reloading the data with 1 more year of data. A variety of trainings coming up. So there'll be trainings, as I mentioned earlier, for LEAs, for business administrators, for school board members. So look for this information on the iPlatform website. All the trainings are listed there and the ways to register them, share them with your schools, share them with your parents, etc. And last slide, 5-6 minutes over, is our contact information. So please reach out to us. You also, the department encourages you to use help desk tickets. So if you've got questions about the system, if you're having troubles with it, please use a help desk ticket too, so that we can kind of log it and know what's happening. But by all means, feel free to reach out to us. We don't want you to struggle. Okay, so with that, I'll take a breath.
I just want to add something, Mike. I think you did a wonderful job with the training. Thank you so much. But I do want to add something because this is an internal training. If within the DOE, I mean, if your department is in charge of any of these data points, and you can view it, you can tell us if our data, because once the data comes to us, we aggregate it, we do that. So part of our data governance program is that this provides a way for you to look at that data again and verify it, hopefully in the district review timeframe, not when we go public. But also, now that you understand the scope of what we can do with your data, if you have data that you can give us, I think one of the discussions we were having is about summer programs, but that applies to all of the other programs that we have. If there are data points that you'd like to see integrated in iPlatform, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to work with you and try to get your data in there to help centralize our reporting and connect the pieces together.
Great. Thank you, Nina. So thanks everybody for taking the time to walk through this. Again, join us for one of the other trainings and sit in on those for the other stakeholders. Ask us questions. Let us know how we can make this better. Many thanks to the commissioner for championing this along with Caitlin and Nate and Dina and everyone else. So Lauren, thanks for helping facilitate. And with that, tell everyone to have a wonderful day. Thank you.